Today, we'll be covering a fascinating topic. But before we do that, how would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. Let's get into the video. When adjusted for inflation, the entire Apple company, one of the most recognizable corporations of the modern era, is worth roughly 1/10 of what the Dutch East India Company was at its peak. Although the British, French, Spaniards, and Portuguese are most often blamed for the ills of colonialism, the Dutch were not far behind. Through its international trade, it transformed itself from a group of merchants to an empire in its own right. This company single-handedly reformed the way businesses functioned, creating the foundation of our modern capitalist world with its strengths and weaknesses. But it also employed the use of many slaves. The 16th century brought religious changes and geographical discoveries in Western Europe. The Protestants gradually became economically superior to the Catholics in the late 16th and 17th centuries. The Catholic South, mainly Spain, Portugal, and Italy, which dominated European trade in the 15th and early 16th century, slowly began to decay. Their economic supremacy was steadily fading in favor of the Northern European Protestant regions, notably England, Northern Germany, and the Low Countries, consisting of the modern Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The financial prosperity of the Dutch came through their wool and woodworking industries. They would buy raw materials, like wool, from Spain and England and make finished products sold across Europe for a substantial profit. The Low Countries quickly became one of the wealthiest parts of 16th century Europe. Religious differences between the Catholic Habsburgs, who exerted their influence over most of Europe, including the Low Countries, and the Protestant Dutch led to the 80 Years' War. By the late 1580s, the Dutch managed to defend their newly found independence, becoming a de facto sovereign state. Philip II, from the House of Habsburg, issued several trading embargoes against them. The most notable was banning them from Lisbon, the spice hub of Europe. These sanctions gave them an incentive to find a way to enter the spice trade for profit and cause harm to their enemies. Luckily for them, in 1592, they got their hands on detailed accounts of Portuguese trade routes and networks, local Indian and Indonesian peoples and lands, and detailed accounts of the various uses of spices and their locations, all accompanied by maps and illustrations. To ensure cooperation between competing franchises, the Dutch government, aka the States General, decided to merge them, giving birth to the United East India Company. It was known as Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie in Dutch, often abbreviated as VOC. The company had a board of 17 representatives, known as the Heren 17 or Lord 17. The Dutch government gave the VOC a monopoly on trading in the East Indies. Furthermore, the States General gave the company the right to maintain armies, build forts, conclude treaties with Asian rulers, and even wage wars and make peace in the Republic's name. Essentially, the VOC became a state, with an enormous level of independence from the central Dutch government. This approach was different from the Portuguese and the Spaniards, as all of their expeditions were founded and guided by the Crown. While the merchants founded the organization, any Dutch citizen could buy a share in the company and the profits with enough money. This fact caused some historians to label the Dutch East India Company as the first joint stock corporation, though this is a somewhat disputed claim. And the possibility of high profit did attract many interested citizens. From the very start, it was clear that the VOC was a powerful new player in the trading world. Its early success only invigorated the Dutch merchants, who yearned for victories over their enemies and huge profits. But at the same time, the VOC's achievements were a clear red flag to every other European nation involved in the spice trade. Instead of waging war in Europe, the Dutch opted for a ceasefire and began expanding their trade network in Asia. Through negotiations and attacks, as the truce was limited to Europe only, the Dutch traders established their presence in India, China, and Japan. At the same time, they expanded their influence in Indonesia, mainly in the Maluku Archipelago region. Here, the Dutch East India Company would conflict with the British East India Company, as both were stepping on each other's toes. They decided to cooperate initially, but ended this agreement when tensions kept rising. In 1618, Jan Peter Zoon Koon, an experienced trader and a ruthless person, was appointed as the next VOC commander in Asia. His relentless tactics and no-holds-barred approach have left a mark on the VOC's legacy. After a Sino-Dutch conflict between 1622 and 1623, the Dutch were defeated and forced to conduct their trade with China indirectly through the island of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan. In contrast to the lack of success in China, the Japanese market favored the Dutch. By the early 1620s, the VOC had already established its presence there, competing mainly with the Portuguese. The latter lost the trust of the local government due to their religious activity. In 1639, the Dutch were the only foreigners allowed to enter Japan apart from the Chinese. The VOC had similar success in India. Since the early years of the 17th century, the company had its strongholds on the southeastern coast of India, known as the Coromandel Coast. It expanded its holdings through the decades, slowly expelling the Portuguese. The most significant breakthrough in that region came in 1658, when the Dutch managed to remove the Portuguese from Sri Lanka, helping them secure their position in the Coromandel Coast. The Dutch were less fortunate in Cambodia and Vietnam, regions somewhat under Chinese influence. Still, the company created significant trading posts in Bengal, in the delta of the Ganges River. The VOC got its first foothold there in the 1620s and kept expanding its influence during the 17th century. It was seen as an important market since it was under the Mughal rule and gave the Dutch access to silk and textiles, sugar, opium, and saltpeter, a key raw material for the production of gunpowder. All these were needed for intra-Asian trade as they helped rely less on the precious metals from Europe. The company also formed trading posts in Arakan in the 1620s. This region, part of modern-day Myanmar, was important as a source of rice and slaves. In 1641, the Dutch also took over Malacca, present-day Malaysia, from the Portuguese, ending their presence in the Malay archipelago. On top of that, the company had already expanded farther west, establishing trading posts in Persia, located in modern-day Iran, in the 1620s. Its main port was in the city of what is today called Bandar Abbas, located on the eastern edges of the Persian Gulf. The Dutch entered the Arabian Peninsula with high hopes, but could do little to annoy the British and Portuguese. Around 1670, when the VOC was at its peak, the company employed about 80,000 people of various nationalities and races, of whom 30,000 were soldiers. It had about 200 ships, 3/4 of which were armed merchant ships, while the rest were fully equipped warships. It had trade stations and colonies from the tip of South Africa to the southern shores of Japan. It was a genuinely international and multinational corporation, maybe the first of its kind. According to some modern researchers, the company was worth around 78 million Dutch guilders. When accounted for inflation, this sum is roughly equivalent to 7.9 trillion modern-day US dollars, making the VOC the wealthiest corporation in the history of humanity. Chartered by the States General, the VOC was a state-sponsored monopoly. It looked like an infallible behemoth in the latter half of the 17th century. The tide of change began with the VOC's expulsion from Formosa in 1662, caused by the fall of the Ming dynasty and the rise of the Qing dynasty in China. Eventually, this led to the complete closure of the Sino-Dutch silk trade in 1666. The Dutch relied on the Chinese silks and textiles to trade for Japanese gold and silver, which they could then use to acquire other goods in the Asian markets that were needed for intra-Asian and European trade. Concerned about the effects of foreign trade on the local economy, the Japanese government began limiting its dealings with the Dutch. In 1671, they limited the number of Dutch ships visiting Japan to 5 per year. But even that was not enough for the Japanese, as the results were not satisfying. Thus, in 1685, the Japanese government also limited the export of their precious metals. Meanwhile, political shifts in Europe, namely the 3 Anglo-Dutch Wars, also hurt the VOC's trade. The Third War was particularly taxing as it severed direct trade connections between the VOC's European headquarters and their Asian markets. For decades, the VOC intentionally kept their prices reasonable to discourage new competitors from challenging their monopoly. Yet, in the 1670s, the British East India Company aggressively attacked the Dutch monopoly due to the rise in the value of spices. The cost of an extensive military needed to fight new competitors, and a substantial fleet required to transport large amounts of goods made it harder to cover the smaller profit margins and decayed intra-Asian trade network. During the first decades of the 18th century, the Dutch expanded their territories in India, most notably the Malabar coast, Java, Sri Lanka, and other regions. They unsuccessfully tried to gain control over the production of certain goods and increase their taxable income. Despite all its flaws, the mid-17th century VOC was salvageable, but rotten at the top. The here in 17, once a group of savvy merchants, were now replaced with the members of the hereditary aristocracy. They had lost their trading touch and were only now concerned with filling their pockets with gold instead of fixing the issues. After the destruction caused by the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, the VOC was losing money and pleaded with the government to help it. Help did arrive, but it was too little too late. France, which had conquered the Dutch Republic in 1795, turned it into a client state and the first of the sister republics, renaming it the Batavian Republic. The Batavian Republic did try to keep the company working for a while, but on December 31, 1799, the VOC charter was left to expire, officially ending the existence of a once mighty corporation that ruled the East Indies with an iron fist. After the fall of Napoleon and the creation of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, Great Britain returned the Indonesian territories to the Dutch, which became known as the Dutch East Indies. However, the British retained the South African colonies and Ceylon. The worst aspect of the Dutch East India Company was its position and attitude toward human life. After Combe became the Governor-General, the idea of creating monopolies and generating profits at any cost became the primary concern. Because of the relatively high percentage of enslaved people, there were racist views among most Dutch in the East Indies, or at least those in higher positions. But on the other hand, the VOC, as a corporation, was seemingly more tolerant and open-minded, even if its officials were not. Since the Dutch Republic lacked enough people to fulfill the company's need for a workforce, it was relatively open to recruiting from other nations. That is why it had a lot of British, French, Germans, and Scandinavians among its crew. There were also several people from modern-day Belgium and Luxembourg. The exploitation of both the local population and natural resources, combined with a high degree of control over large territories, makes the VOC an essential step in the development of colonialism, especially considering that the company also created a vast network that covered half of the globe. However, it unintentionally ended up connecting all of the Asian nations that were part of their intra-Asian trade, exposing them to other cultures and the European culture. Similarly, the Japanese and Chinese porcelain and art that arrived in Europe inspired European artists for generations to come. And as they made them all part of an intricate economic system, it did create a sense of codependency, sending roots for the development of globalization. To learn more about the Dutch East India Company, check out our book, The Dutch East India Company, a captivating guide to the first true multinational corporation and its impact on the Dutch War of Independence from Spain. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.